right, it is 2:03, so we'll go ahead and get started and let folks come continue to trickle in. But let me just take a moment to introduce myself and say thank you all for being here. My name is Jack Towers. I am AIM's Farm and Food Business Resource Manager, which means I help coordinate some of our support programming, including our technical education, which is what this webinar series is part of. For anyone who's not familiar, AIM is a nonprofit based out of here in San Rafael, responsible for running 9 farmers markets around the Bay Area, as well as providing support to farmers and food makers throughout the region. So thank you all for being here today. I'm going to go ahead and drop my email in the chat. Feel free to drop some information about yourself as well, as Meg has very kindly described. And I will turn it over to her to introduce myself. Oh, and before I do that, one final thing. For anyone who is looking for Spanish translation, para español, you can click on the interpretation and interpretación at the bottom of your screen to opt into the Spanish channel. And with that, I will turn it over to Meg.
Thank you so much, Jack. Thank you, everyone who is tuning in. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm really excited to share my knowledge with you all. This is going to be like a workshop style format. So if you have either a pen and paper that you want to use or taking digital notes, whatever you want to do, at the end of this, I think Jack mentioned, we're going to have these slides sent to you. So you don't need to take diligent notes on what's on the slides, but anything that I might say and you might want to record. I'll also give some meeting recap notes. So just keep that in mind too if you don't want to take notes during the presentation. Okay. Um, yeah, and again, I put in the chat if you want to introduce yourself, what you sell, and what markets you attend. I'd love to know who's here, so don't be shy. And I see a couple people already putting some responses. Welcome. Awesome. Very, very cool to see. And also, I am going to do questions at the end, but as I go along, I'm happy to answer any questions. So feel free to also put those in the chat. Cool. A little intro about myself before we get started. My name is Meg Fabish-Kuhn, and I've spent the last 10 years helping small food brands figure out how to get noticed, which is how I define marketing. And I've done that whether it's at a farmer's market, on social media, in a retail store. I've done everything from in-store merchandising to digital marketing and social media strategy. So I have a lot of ways that I want to share with you that I've learned over the past decade, tips and tricks of the trade. Let's see. Today, this is what we're going to learn about, mostly how to create a brand story so that you can connect with customers at the market. We're going to review how you can design signs that will actually sell your product, and then how you can effectively structure your booth to optimize for marketing. And then at the end, if we have time, we'll go over how to use Canva effectively. We'll do a little crash course there. Maybe some of you already know how to use Canva, but I use it day in and day out, so I have a lot of cool tips that I might be able to share with you. All right. And I'm just checking in with the chat. Thank you for introducing yourself. Welcome, everyone. Okay. So when you think about marketing, I want you to think about being at the market and how chaotic it is. So customers are walking past dozens of booths. They're carrying their bags. They're juggling their kids, trying to keep track of them. They're checking their phone. And so you really only have 3 seconds before someone decides to stop and either engage with your booth or just keep walking. And usually that's not enough time to have a conversation with them or even hand them a sample. And just because this is what human nature is, they're going to glance at your booth and make a snap judgment. So, in those 3 seconds, the question is, what are they seeing? And are you making it clear enough about what you're selling? And is there anything that makes you stand out from the booth next to you? Um, so really, is there a reason for them to stop and pause? That's what marketing is about. It's not about, how much money you can spend on cool signage, but making people, the right people, notice you and why, and understand why they should care about your booth. So, little overview on why marketing matters in the first place and probably why you're here to learn more about that. Um, so at the farmers market, it's pretty competitive because typically you have multiple vendors or market participants selling the same or a similar product. So it's really important for you to figure out how you can effectively communicate how exactly you're different so that someone can choose you over the person that is a couple booths down or even just next to you. So, how are the different ways that people might decide to purchase from you? Um, you might think price is a big factor, and that definitely is. But more often than you think, people are actually buying based on connection. And that is the psychology of marketing, whether you realize it or not. So people will choose the vendor whose story that they know and are familiar with and who have accomplished making them feel something or a certain way. So if you think about your own life and say you walk into a coffee shop and the barista says, "This is a single origin coffee from a small farm in Colombia that I visited last year," there is something that shifts in your brain. And you're now not just buying a standard cup of coffee, you're buying into that story. So that's the power of telling your story and what a story can do. And the good news is that everyone has a story. And even if you haven't put it into words yet, you will be able to because you have one. And that's what we're going to do next as a little exercise. So, um, we're going to do this little workshop here to fill in a sentence. So, if you want to put it in the chat, you can fill in the blanks here. So we're the only blank at this market who blanks. And this will be a good opportunity too to learn who all is here. And um, I can help you workshop this differentiation statement, which will be part of your brand story. So, a few examples that I have here listed. We're the only honey vendor at this market who keeps bees in Marin County. That's one example. Or maybe we're the only bread baker at this market who uses 100% local grain. Or we're the only vegetable farm at this market run by 3 generations. So those are very specific examples, which is really important to note because a lot of people will say, like, we have great tomatoes, but everyone thinks that they have great tomatoes. And so you need to find something that only you can say. And we have the Spanish translation in the chat. But I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about this. And I mean, already, Aisha, in your intro, you say, we specialize in Afghan food. And you've been to the Ferry Building Saturday Market. So you could probably take your statement about Afghan food and find a few more differentiating factors there. Okay, there we go. Thank you, Dania, for your example. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. Um, she says, we're the only yerba mate shop at the market who offers traditional Argentinian yerba mate drinks and coffee substitutes. That's awesome. And then one additional factor there could be I mean, so you're sourcing it from Argentina, for example, and um, maybe there's another characteristic about your shop or your shop that makes you different from any other vendor that might also sell yerba mate. We're the only dessert treat vendor making waffles and gelato entirely from plants using produce from the market. That's awesome. Great examples. I'm gonna give just a couple more minutes if anyone wants to add to this. But this is a really important part of your brand story because this is what a customer is going to go home and tell their friend about, like, oh, I have to go to the Sunday market, or you have to go to the Sunday market because this vendor or this market participant is selling the only yerba mate that you could get from Argentina, like that's traditional in the Bay Area, for example. We're the only Afghan food vendor at this market providing delicious flavors tracing back to the Silk Route. Awesome. These are all very, very good examples. And we are the only vendors who supplies cactus in the Central Valley. So, uh, okay, that's very cool. So I'm assuming you sell cactus. That's very, very interesting. Important to Hispanic culture. Very cool. So you could say we're the only vendors who grow cactus in the Central Valley, or we're the only cactus vendors at this market who grow in the Central Valley. Grow, supply, and prepare. Great. Okay, cool. Those are all really good examples. And we're now going to build on that. So the next formula that I'm going to give you is three different sentences, and we're going to build on using that differentiating statement that you just created. Um, and ultimately, this brand story should only be 30 seconds. So 3 seconds is the right length so that people don't start to tune out when they're hearing your story. So the first sentence is going to be, I started this because. So this is going to be your origin story. And try to keep this short. I mean, I know that there's a lot of things you can say probably about your origin story, but what exactly drove you to do this in one sentence? And then we're going to then add on that statement that you just created about the difference. And then finally, when you buy from us, this is the invitation and it tells why should the customer support you? Because why are they going to be buying from you and makes it different from any product that they can buy at the grocery store, for example. I'll give an example of something that's not true, but it's an example. So I started the Blue Heron Farm because my grandmother taught me that the best food comes from healthy soil. And what makes us different is that we're one of the few farms in Marin growing dry farmed tomatoes without irrigation, just the flavor that comes from the deep roots. So when you buy from us, you're supporting a farming practice that's been around for generations and tastes like nothing you'll find in the store. So that's an example like of a more polished story. So yours doesn't have to be that polished yet, but that's about 20 seconds. I can communicate that to customers, and then someone will walk away knowing my why, your what, and why they should care about my product. So let's practice that now. Um, if you want to add to the chat again, what is your complete story? So you can use this formula that I have up on the screen. Why did you start the business? What makes you different? And what are you getting when you buy your product? What is the customer getting? And while you're thinking about this, I just want to mention a lot of you live and breathe farming or food production every single day. So it's easy to forget that most of your customers don't. And so most of your customers aren't living the same experiences that you are, but they are curious and interested in them. And that's actually probably why they're at the farmer's market and not the grocery store. So this is your opportunity to educate them. Something that you find mundane or really common can be very interesting for them. So, they want to hear your story. That's why they're buying from you. This is your opportunity to tell them that, to be a storyteller. And they want to feel connected to where their food comes from. So small details are very important here. And this one, I'm going to give you a few more minutes because it's definitely a loaded question to put together your story in a small amount of time, even to write your origin story in one sentence. But try not to overthink it. Just why did you wake up one day and decide, and why do you decide every day that you want to create a product? Welcome, Martine. So another example while we're waiting for, okay, oh, Christine just added one. I started Flora because as a career pastry chef, I developed allergies to eggs and dairy, but still wanted great gelato. I make our gelato entirely from plants so people like me can enjoy without feeling like it's a compromise. When you buy from us, you treat yourself and the planet. I love that. That sounds very professional and polished. Sal said, we started this business to make an honest living doing something meaningful. What makes us different is our unique product and organic, sustainable practices. When you buy from us, you're supporting a family and a vital business in farming, healthy lifestyle, and supporting environmentally healthy practices. Excellent. I love it. I'm just going to give some other examples. So, if you maybe grow 6 varieties of basil, that could be a good thing to mention here. Or maybe your eggs are from pastured chickens. This is a good place to say that too. The quality of your ingredients definitely matter. Or if you wake up every day at 3 a.m. to bake bread in a wood-fired oven, this is a good place to say that. Those are the small details that I was referring to earlier. Okay, well, in the interest of time, as other people might build their own stories, I'm going to show you a case study of a market participant, Lakian Farms, that I think has a really good example of creating a narrative or a brand story. So I'm going to share their website here. Let's see. Okay, so scrolling through their website, They actually changed it, so it was a little bit different before, but they talk about how they are a four generation farm. They came to America following the Armenian genocide, and then they get specific about how many heirloom varieties they grow. So they grow over 80 heirloom varieties. So they're not just saying they grow tomatoes, but they're giving you a reason to care about their tomatoes and giving you a reason to buy into their story. So you're not just supporting buying tomatoes, you're actually supporting their family legacy of four generations, and you feel like you're part of something. And another thing to note about this is that when they say they have over 80 different heirloom varieties, that is a great data point or statistic that people can then go and tell their friends. Like that number, 80, sticks better than if you say we grow a lot of heirloom tomato varieties. So think about that when you're positioning yourself and crafting your narrative and your brand story. The more data points you can use, the better.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Martina Viña. Estaba poniendo en el chat, pero no me deja bien la tableta. No sé si se pueda compartir en video porque no me deja escribir bien.
I am going to defer to our translator on that one. I think I understood a little bit, but unfortunately, I am not fluent in Spanish. Let's see. He wants to share live. Okay. I'm Feel free to share your brand story live, and then hopefully we could have the translator translate it in the chat in real time.
Sí, mi nombre es Martina Viña y a Viña Organics Fans. Um, Voy a cumplir 9 años en mi negocio. Ahorita estamos cultivando 27 acres orgánicos. Tenemos 2 ranchos. Y mi historia comenzó desde que cumplo la mayoría de edad. Empecé a trabajar con mi papá en la agricultura, ya que tenía la edad para trabajar. Me enseñé a cultivar varios cultivos con él. Ah, eh, Me salí de la compañía donde trabajaba, y fui a las clases para tomar el curso de la agricultura orgánica. Duré 5 años cultivando en Alba. De ahí se acabó el programa. Conseguí terreno en otro lado y ahorita estamos cultivando 27 acres. Le vendemos a los coolers por mayoreo. Y ahorita quiero cambiar un poco a como lo estamos haciendo de vender a los coolers. Queremos trabajar un poco con la comunidad y queremos vender el producto local o venderlo en los farmers market, porque en veces lo vendemos en los coolers y no nos dan el retorno que vale el producto.
I'm not sure if this cut out for everyone, but thank you so much for sharing, Martin. I can't hear you anymore. Maybe his phone lost connection, but I'm reading through the chat right now about your story. Um, this is an excellent story and a good way to, I think, condense that now is to follow that brand formula. Um, I'm trying to read in real time here. So let's see. Oop, I think he's going in and out of connection. But I'm going to go ahead and um, continue with the presentation, and anyone who wants to continue to put their brand story there in the chat, we can revisit that later. And I want to make sure that we get to the next part, which is now that you have your story, where does it go? So we've assembled our story, and this particular webinar addresses how you can market the story at markets. So we're going to focus on signage here. But I do want to just point out that not only can we show our story on signage at our booth, but you should be using this story for repetition across all different channels and what we call touch points. So in your social media bio, on your website, on your business card. And that's why we have it so small and condensed, is that we can make maybe a tagline from it, specifically from our differentiating factor. And then it's a good thing to practice in conversation with new customers. So again, that's why it's only a 20-second to 30-second story, so that people can stay engaged every time you talk about it. And this definitely takes practice, and you're probably not going to figure out your entire story here just in this webinar. So I encourage you to think about this post-webinar too, and practice it with people and ask them, especially people that know you, how it sounds to them and how they might be able to help you improve it. Because especially the people around you, they will know details about your life or your operation that they can add and they think might be valuable. And again, you want to put this everywhere you can in the same type of format that you can, so that you can build recognition, which then in turn builds trust with your customers. Okay, so now let's talk about how you can communicate this visually via signage. Let me make sure that these slides are changing. Yeah, I think they are. Okay. So even if you have a really great story, it doesn't help if you don't have great signs. And so here we're going to practice and review some common mistakes that happen with signs, especially at the markets. And then I'll also go over 5 signs that I recommend that your booth does have. And this will be kind of a checklist for you to go over and think about and then make. And then we'll go into Canva and make a few of these signs. Okay, so hopefully the slide isn't too small, but here are some common sign mistakes. And signage is not easy, and most likely we're not all graphic designers here, and we don't have the luxury of hiring graphic designers, which is totally fine. That's why we're taking this webinar right now, so that I can point out the common places where people go wrong. But luckily, we also have a lot of tools and resources and examples for what does work well. So in the top left here, the problem with this sign is just simply that it's too small. And we're going to go over something called the 6-foot rule, which is basically, I think I'll just skip to the next slide, where it says, can you read your sign from 6 feet back? And if you can't read it from 6 feet back, then your customers can't either. So here are some conditions for what each sign should contain. Letters should be at least 2 inches tall. Prices should be 3 inches tall. And then you should focus on using thick fonts when you're writing these signs out. And then making sure you have proper contrast, meaning you're either sticking with a dark on light theme or a light on dark theme. And this makes any sign accessible to people who, to anyone really. Um, and if you want to learn more about accessibility guidelines, you could do a quick Google search on what colors work well together. So I'll go back though to other common sign mistakes. So the one in the top right is just too cluttered. And the problem with this one is someone who made the sign has a lot to communicate, but since there's no visual hierarchy, the person reading the sign doesn't know where to read first and will probably just give up on reading the sign altogether. Also, signage by nature should have pretty much the least amount of copy or words on it possible to still fully communicate your message, but try to always pare down how much you're putting on the sign. And this is something that you'd really need to work at because I'm sure you'll have a lot to communicate, but try to just dial that back. And then let's see, bottom left, this is a common mistake, is that people will not include prices. And what happens, and you might not even realize this, is that they might be in a hurry and they don't want to bother you, maybe, and don't ask how much a certain item is. But the person in the booth over does have prices listed. So they'll just go to that one because they already know how much the celery is going to be. So by not having prices, you're indirectly creating another barrier to buying, and you want to remove as many barriers as possible so that people are ready to buy at your booth. And then in the bottom right, finally, it says no personality. This is a sign. It just says fresh produce. And the problem with this one, even though it's functional and straight to the point, it's also just forgettable because it's really generic. And you have an opportunity with your signage to create a lasting memory, again, with your story. So this is where branding and brand identity comes into play. And I'm going to go over what that can look like when we visit the Canva segment of our webinar. I think a general rule with signage is like if someone else, another booth can borrow your sign, then you probably haven't made it unique enough. Okay, so here is the checklist that I was mentioning about 5 signs that I think every booth can benefit from. The first one is pretty obvious. It's your business name, and it should be readable from a distance. Again, 6-foot rule. But think about this one as really important so that people know what they need to, how they can find you next week. And then a lot of people will miss this, but they might not know what your business sells just based on your brand name alone. So, like if you're Sunrise Acres, for example, we don't know if you're flowers, vegetables, or eggs. So, you're going to want to put probably like a theme about what you sell. If it can fit into a certain category, then you're going to want to say, like, we're Sunrise Acres, you sell organic vegetables and herbs, so that it is immediately clear and obvious to someone who is walking by. Otherwise, they're just guessing and they'll probably just keep walking. Again, we only have the 3 seconds, and this is likely the first sign that they're going to read. And then, second sign that I recommend is the story that we worked on earlier. So, just that 3-sentence story. If you don't have time to have a conversation with everyone, then hopefully they can read this sign and understand what makes you different. And then we just went over this, but having these pricing signs out. Again, you just want to avoid any hesitation for someone who might approach your product and want to buy. And then this is a big one. So the we accept sign so that you can indicate what kind of payments that you accept at your booth. Um, don't assume people will know that you accept credit cards, or maybe if you don't accept credit cards, you should explicitly state that. But a lot of buyers at farmers markets will generally assume that market participants can only accept cash unless it is explicitly stated that there is, a credit card terminal. And then this is also a good place to say whether or not you accept CalFresh EBT. And then finally, the fifth sign, and I know that this is a lot of signs. So if you can't do all of them, totally understandable. But this last one I think is a nice to have, which is any sort of call to action to give a passerby a reason to engage. So an example of that would be a free sample or like ask about our new product, our lavender honey, for example. This turns the interaction into a conversation. And then finally, I didn't list it here, but I wanted to add on that all your signage is a good opportunity to also add in your social media handles if you have a social media handle, which is a username, if you're not familiar with that term. So you want to put in your at username so that people, if they happen to take a photo, they can tag you on Instagram, for example, or they want to learn more, so they'll go and follow you on Instagram. And again, that's free marketing if they do tag you. So you want to put that in very visible places. I'm gonna look at the chat real quick just to make sure. Okay, cool. Some more stories coming in. Amazing. I think before I go to this next section, if you have any questions about what I've mentioned so far, I'd love to hear them in the chat. But otherwise, I think I'll move on to this marketing segment and how you can visually present your booth to make it more appealing. Okay, so I think everyone will agree that your own product is really great, but there are some booths that tend to attract more customers than others, and a lot of that just comes down to visual presentation and how that vendor has managed to present their product. So, we live in a world where things are highly visual. Social media is highly visual, and that's not going to go away. People are taking photos of their food, they're taking photos of their farmers market hauls and what they do on the weekends, and that is not going to go away. And if you manage to make your booth attractive enough that it's photo worthy, then you can get free advertising out of that. So how exactly can you do that? Um, and also why would you want to do that? Why would you want to accomplish getting onto someone's Instagram story? Um, or having an Instagrammable moment through your booth. This is an example of something I posted to my story, and it got like a lot of engagement and a lot of click-throughs to Full Belly Farm because I posted about mulberries, which a lot of people didn't know about this product. And they were delicious, but the Full Belly staff member that I was talking to educated me about them as well. And so that was a good interaction with their brand story. And what ended up happening was after I posted this, a lot of people went the following week and ended up seeking out Full Belly, buying these mulberries, and telling me how that experience was for them, which was really fun. But as you can see, that's kind of a flywheel, what we call it in marketing terms, where you are creating momentum that builds on itself. And this is called user-generated content. So when your customers or your users are creating content on your behalf, which is honestly the gold standard, because then you won't have to work as hard to put content out for yourself, and your customers are raving about your products and they find reasons to share it with other people. So that is why you want to encourage people to share on social media. It's a great tool that we have available to us today. And it's just part of our digital ecosystem too. So it would be remiss to ignore. Um, and also, how do you create a photo-worthy display that is worth a customer taking a photo of? So some examples of this would be um, the hero product. So like the mulberry example, featuring that like when you have a seasonal product and telling a story about it, maybe through a sign. And then in terms of the visual merchandising of the way you display your products in your booth, having different height and levels to create visual interest. And that's welcoming people into the booth. And then creating a look of abundance, even if you don't have a ton of inventory to display, there's definitely tricks for making it look more abundant. So people are drawn to that abundance because it's signaling freshness and quality. So paying attention to how you're laying things out on your booth is very, very important. Here are some examples of what you can do. This is Canteen Meats. You might be familiar with them, an AIM market participant. And they have a signature element, which is using thrifted vintage finds. And it's creating this vibe, this unique character about them. They're using a vintage scale, for example. And I think one of them comes from a visual merchandising background. So that's definitely helpful, but maybe you can ask them, for some tips and tricks. So that's Canteen Meats. And then this is a great sign that they also had out at one of their markets to introduce an unfamiliar, uncommon product. So they're telling you how to pronounce it. This is, again, very Instagrammable because, I might put this on my story and say, like, oh, I'm trying a new ingredient for the first time. They're giving suggestions on how to use this new product or uncommon product. So, like in pastas, pizzas, and then giving additional product information. And this is not a super polished sign, but every part of it is very intentional. There's visual hierarchy. It doesn't quite pass the 6-foot rule, but I will say there's some exceptions because there is visual interest to draw someone in and say, like, what's on that board? and it's kind of it draws you in, it reels you in. There is a question in the chat. I struggle with this topic of photo-worthy displays because my booth requires a full mesh enclosure by the health department. It's hard for people to see what you're doing as you pass by. Do you have any tips for my situation? That is tough. One way, and hopefully this is allowed, would be having maybe some sort of A-frame in front of your booth if you're allowed to have that. And if not, um, are you able to tack any signage onto that full mesh enclosure? Um, Basically, how can you work within, you know, that situation where the mesh enclosure is definitely unsightly because you can't have all your products displayed out in the open, but just figuring out what are workarounds. And if you didn't have that mesh enclosure, what types of merchandising would you have? I wonder if you could take like a photo and then that's what goes in front of the mesh enclosure in the very front. Um, if you would like more ideas on this and if you want to provide some more details, feel free to follow up with me after the webinar too, so I can suggest something specific to your situation. Okay. All right. Well, actually, this could be helpful for that situation as well, which is the idea of social proof. And if you haven't heard of that, it's the idea that people are more likely to trust you because they see that other people already trust you. So it's the same reason you might check restaurant reviews before trying a new place. So an example of this is like having the Marin Best of County badge. If you've been awarded that, of course. You don't want to just put that on your booth if that's not true, but any sort of testimonials that customers may have given you, you can capture and you can print on signs. Or if you've ever been featured in any sort of publication, this is a really good thing to call out at your booth so that people know that you've had this sort of recognition. Um, because you can say you have the best peaches, but if someone else has pointed that out, they've basically corroborated this claim. Um, and then a big thing, especially with farmers markets, is if you're on any sort of local menus or chefs, especially in the Bay Area, are using your product, that's a huge opportunity to call that out. I know for a fact, especially at the Marin markets, that I think almost every produce participant there is used by Michelin chefs around the Bay Area. And so just leveraging that name and saying like our produce is used regularly at Lazy Bear and Statebird Provisions would be a huge help in encouraging a customer to make a purchasing decision. So you're leveraging someone else's credibility, or well, it's your own credibility, but you're leveraging their trust badge to work in your favor. Um, there is Amelia said in the chat, in my case, people love our product and are always taking pictures, but the pictures do not translate in shares or mentions on social media. This is pretty common, and sometimes like maybe they are sharing, but they're on a private account. And one thing that you can do is incentivize them to share for whatever reason. Maybe if they do share to social, they can receive a promotional code, or, a discount off of their next order. But sometimes that's not always viable for a business or it's too much to track. So you could get really creative in ways. You might want to run contests on social media, like tag us in this and show us how you use this recipe. And you can enter to win a free package of pasta, for example. These are pretty effective in my experience. Um, and I'll have actually a lot more to say just on the social media topic in the next webinar that's happening on February 24th on social media. Yeah, but again, a lot to say about social media, so we'll revisit that. And there are some translation issues, so sorry about that. I'm going to keep going, but the full recording in English and Spanish will be on the YouTube channel. Okay, so I want to leave one more tip about booth strategy, and that is cross merchandising. And sometimes you might have heard it as bundling, but simply put, the idea is that you should pair products that go together, because that might not always be obvious to people passing by. So, for example, putting tomatoes and basil and your olive oil products together, bundling it and saying, here's tonight's caprese salad. So, um, they might have just bought tomatoes in the first place, but now you've put that together as a bundle and it's like a $30 purchase instead of the original $3 tomato purchase. And the customer is happy because they feel like you just helped them solve dinner. So, bundling or cross merchandising and getting creative with the ingredients that you already sell and how they can be used together. And again, this is just a simple little sign that sparks inspiration for the customer. And you're being really helpful by pairing these products together. Cool. So we have about 35 minutes left. So I wanted to take a little small break. And also, while we're taking this 5-minute break, our next part is going through Canva. So if you'd like to pull up Canva on your end, on your own computer, and work through this with me, maybe you already have a Canva account, but if not, you could take this time to create a Canva account, which is completely free. The free version should be more than enough for what we're doing here. And in the meantime, I'll be setting my own Canva up and taking any questions in the comments. But we will reconvene at 3 o'clock. So if you want to go ahead and get Canva set up. Okay, it's just about 3 o'clock, so I'm gonna jump into the Canva portion of this. And if you're not familiar with Canva, it is a design tool that is free to use. You just create an account with your email and you set your password. And the reason I wanted to go over it today is because I wanted to show you how you can create effective signage for your booth and marketing your business. And it might seem obvious, and this is going to be kind of a beginner tutorial on it, but there are a few tips and tricks that you might not know about. If you want to stick around, if you haven't, or if you regularly use Canva, I think you can still benefit from this. And not only are we going to cover how to use Canva, but also how can you effectively use Canva to create signage that will actually be effective, because there's, as it says, millions of templates, but just because there's millions of templates doesn't mean you should use all of them, and I'll show you examples of good templates and bad templates. Okay. So I think the first place we should start is with Canva's brand guidelines. So I have different brand guidelines in my personal Canva, as you can see here, but I'm going to go to Rollin' Roots as an example. And what this is a place for me to establish brand identity so that I can reuse this again and again when I go to make new signage within Canva. So you're probably not just going to make those 5 signs and then walk away. You're you're probably going to have to create new signage and also social media assets pretty regularly in Canva, and that's why I think it's a good tool. Or maybe you need to update your pricing sheets or whatever it is. I think it's a good idea to create these brand guidelines so that you can come back into Canva and easily make new templates for yourself. So, what this allows you to do in the brand guidelines is put in logos so that you can use them consistently. You can set colors, so your color palette that allows your customers to see brand recognition. So, for example, Coca-Cola Red, you know Coca-Cola Red from across the parking lot and their logo because they're consistently using the same red color. These here, they're called hex colors, and they're set very intentionally so that they can be used and repeated again and again and again. And I mean, if you put like one separate digit in this color, it's going to be completely different than this particular blue. So it's a good thing to set these and reuse the color palette so that you don't use a different blue next time you create a new design and lose those colors. And then finally, fonts I think are important again, so that you have consistency across all of your assets. Setting title and subtitle fonts is key here, and you can just press into it and set a font, which I recommend you use something that has good contrast for your headings. So usually a bold font. And then your body font or subtitle font is going to be less bold than your heading font. Okay. And then you can also put in, I don't have any here, but you could put in your photo assets if you regularly use the same photos over and over again. Same goes for your graphics. So I find this to be very helpful. All right. So now that we have our brand established, let's look at different templates we have available to us. And I'm going to show you how you can use a template and customize it for your specific brand. So here in Canva, if you go to templates, you can search for any of their millions of free templates to use. In this case, I typed in price list vegetables. For example, if I wanted to create a price list, and I see a few here that are good contenders. A lot of these will only work if you're up close to it. So I'm trying to find something that will work well from far away. But I don't think any of these will necessarily pass the 6 foot rule unless you blow it up when you print it to a really large size. But I'm going to click into this one, for example, the price list for vegetables. And what I can do is go to my brand on the left and select my brand template. And here you're just going to be able to add your logo just by clicking it and placing it wherever is relevant. And then you can resize elements you can recolor things. And here you'll see I have my roll and root palette off to the left, and I can click different elements to recolor them. Thank you, Sal, for joining us. Okay, so this is an example of how you would customize any sort of template within Canva. And you can save this and reuse this, week after week, even if your prices change. You can come back and just edit this. And one thing I did want to point out is that you can print pretty easily from Canva. And I'm not necessarily saying with a home printer, but if you wanted to, I mean, you can with a home printer for sure, but if you wanted to share this over in the top right, there's the button. You can say print with Canva. And this is an alternative to, say, taking it to FedEx or printing it at Home Depot or Office Depot or any sort of print shop. And they have very good options here for different cardstock and quality. And you can do the entire checkout. Okay, so just to note here, it did resize that based on whatever template I chose. And so it changed the design a little bit. So you can go back in and edit it accordingly. But you can choose your different paper types here, your different finishes, and you can check out. There's free delivery here as well. I just a huge advocate for Canva printing because it's very, very convenient. And with any sort of workflow, when it comes to marketing and creating marketing assets, having the most efficient start to finish is always good because otherwise it could be very cumbersome to create all of the signage that we mentioned. And let's see. Another thing I wanted to point out within Canva is that you have access to very high quality assets, whether it's stock photos that you want to use to represent something or graphics. You could search, let's say, garlic here, and not only see garlic graphics, but also photos and videos to use, which this comes heavy into play, especially when you're designing graphics for social media. These could be very, very valuable assets to have. Um, and in the past, for this type of high quality stock photo, you'd have had to pay a lot of money. So it's all included in Canva, which is really helpful. And do we have any specific questions about Canva that I can help address? Let me know in the comments or in the chat. So we've reviewed the printing, how to store your brand guidelines so that you can reuse it. You can add and set up any brand templates as well, which is super helpful. Again, to make consistent designs so that you can reuse them, so that people on your team can reuse them and make signage for you on your behalf. Oh, and just for functionality purposes, when taking any signage to market, I highly recommend getting your signage laminated so that it is weatherproof and survives all of the transport and the taking down and putting up again and again. And I also wanted to provide a resource list after as a follow-up for different links for little tools that could make attaching or adhering signage to your stand or to your booth easier. Because there are some items that work better than others, and certain tape, for example, that works better than others. What else? So within the templates of Canva, when you're picking something, make sure if you do intend to print, you start from a print template, because that makes it a lot easier. Like you saw, it resized my design, but I didn't quite intend to print my initial template, and so it resized some of the elements. Cool. All right, so I am going to go back to our presentation, and I wanted to take any questions people would have about the entire webinar. And I can also read a few of the brand stories, and we can refine those if that's helpful. But I just wanted to take this part of the webinar to field any common questions. And if you have that question, then likely someone else here will have a similar question. So don't be shy in asking anything. Everything goes.
While folks are sending their questions in, I'm also just going to drop a short survey in the chat, just to get some feedback from you all before you head out. I'll also email this to you. It's in English and Spanish, but we appreciate any and all feedback to make sure that these can be as helpful as possible.
One question I get a lot is like, where do you even start with all of this? And again, if you participated in this webinar, a good place to start is with that story. And again, refining the story. And then next step, I would say, is making a really, really solid name sign, because as we went over, you really have that first impression to capture and draw someone into your booth. And likely they will look at the sign, your name sign first. So making sure that that is really alluring and well designed. This is a place where it could be a good investment to work with a designer on that, or if you want to DIY it, doing ample research on what works well for your specific niche, but also, again, templates within Canva. There's really good logo templates so that you know where to start. And I encourage you to really make that your own, making sure you've picked a set of brand colors that you want to remain consistent with across all of your marketing touch points, all of your signage. Um, I have questions for anyone who might want to answer, which is, what are some of the biggest challenges you face in merchandising and setting up your farmers market booth? Or do you already have these signs, and what has been working and what doesn't work for you? Another thing is, are you asking people for feedback? I think that's really important, to say, like, what do you think about this sign? Or what are some ways that you think I might be able to improve it? Or asking customers who do know you, you know, why do you keep coming back week after week? What about my story sticks out to you. Cool. Well, I don't think there's too many questions because the chat is kind of quiet right now, but next week, or not next week, but I think in 2 weeks from now on February 24th, we'll be doing a webinar workshop on social media, which will be an hour and a half long. I think it says 2 to 3 p.m., but it should say 2 to 3:30. And there I'll be reviewing what types of social media, is available and why or why not you should be on it. So different channels, um, content that performs for specific channels. We'll be reviewing things like content pillars, content calendars, and how you can effectively and efficiently create content, which, from my experience working with many small food businesses, it's not always maybe your priority and you have a lot of other things going on, but social media is so important in driving traffic to your business, keeping customers apprised. So if you can tune into this webinar, I highly encourage it because I think it will be very rewarding if you can implement even just a couple of the tips from it. And again, I just wanted to mention the resources we have from this webinar. I'll be following up with a checklist, a few templates on best practices for signs, so Canva templates, and we'll have these set of slides and all of the notes as a recap summary from everything we covered in this webinar. And we have about 10 more minutes, but I did just want to say I could talk about this for hours and I feel like we only scratched the surface, but there's so much more when it comes to like seasonal marketing, again, social media strategy, photography, and all of the different marketing touch points that whether it's marketing your business at the market, it doesn't just stop there though. And maybe that's all you have time for, but you can set up specific systems for yourself, having a solid website, making sure you can field any requests or contact, like people will be trying to contact you. So, all of those types of things, if you ever have questions about that, feel free to email me. I have my email here. I have my website also on the slide, spreadaioli.com. But I've worked with numerous small businesses, specifically across food and agriculture, and I'm happy to share examples of what that looks like if I can help you out too. So, uh, unless anyone has any other questions, I think, Jack, is it okay to wrap up or?
Yeah, absolutely. Like Meg said, feel free to drop any questions now. But if that's all, thank you so much for this really amazing presentation. I'm sure it was super, super helpful for our audience. It was great to see some participation. And like Meg said, we'll have another event in just under 2 weeks. And all the materials will be shared along with you after the fact. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here.